Welcome back. The last time we left our crew, Lorraine was threatening Polly, and Polly was definitely feeling threatened. Chapter 3. Polly and Helen were both native to Dysonville and had been friends from the time they attended Mrs. Brown's nursery school. They were 4 years old. As the years went by, the two became inseparable. They went off to different colleges and returned thereafter to the familiarity of rural Dysonville and to each other. But as adults, the two friends, while remaining friends, were quite different. Helen was happy, busy, impulsive, loving, talkative, and trusting. She was also sharp. You had to deserve her trust. Not that that was difficult. Helen liked people. She wanted to trust them. She searched hard for the best part in everyone she met, allowing for no doubt that that part did indeed exist. She rarely failed to bring it out. Helen made people feel safe, and people who feel safe speak openly. Helen knew everybody at the grocery store, the drugstore, and the bank, at the diner, the bar, and the country club. Helen also religiously made visits and took homemade treats to Dysonville Assisted Living, a facility serving mostly those with little family and few means. Polly referred to her devotion as Helen's tendency to flock to the poor, the ignorant, and the underdog. Polly could only assume that it was just a rebellion against Helen's somewhat elitist upbringing. She could find no other way to explain Helen's apparent naivete about people. It seemed to Polly that Helen just didn't have the good sense to care. Poor Polly could never understand that what Helen saw in others was a realness, a genuineness that appealed to her above all other traits and characteristics of any particular person. It wasn't that Helen flocked to the poor, ignorant underdog. Helen found sincerity and genuineness everywhere, and that was what she flocked to. Polly was alert and nervous, and inexplicably upset by the smallest concern. She seemed easily brought to a place of near panic and therefore acting from that place. Her behavior was often inappropriate, and her decisions almost always wrong. That Dysonville forgave her this fault was attested to by the fact that, for the most part, Polly was rather well liked. She was easy in a crowd and willingly flashed a beautiful smile. She could be a good conversationalist. She was a natural flirt. She could keep up with the best of them when it came to drinking and winning at poker. In her late 30s, she married Alexander Franklin, a wealthy banker. He was 60 at the time, and within 10 years, Polly was widowed and very, very well off. Polly fit in and was comfortable with people when they were her people, and they always were. Polly liked it that way. Helen wondered if Polly were consciously aware that she leaned in and whispered when talking about not her people, meaning persons of color, the poor, and in particular Democrats. Polly blamed everything on the Democrats and their tendency to use her money to help those whom she absolutely knew did not deserve it. In 1950, Helen married Andy Wiggins, and in 1957, Helen's only child, Alice, was born. She and Andy had never specifically planned on a child, and the pregnancy was enough to make him question the marriage. Andy just couldn't seem to get past not being the very center of Helen's attention. Helen, on the other hand, was thrilled. Polly was thrilled as well, thrilled to see the selfish bastard go, but bastard or not, this left Helen alone and pregnant. The town had tolerated this for the most part. Helen saw the looks from the church crowd and decided she could do without that part of her schedule for a few months. Sometimes she thought she saw mothers guide their offspring away from her, but she wasn't sure. She was sure that she didn't particularly care. This was a small town. She knew better than to even try to keep secrets. Young, single, and fiercely independent, Polly just couldn't get her head around the idea that Helen planned, single mother or not, to be home with her child alone. Polly launched a relentless effort to push Helen toward the idea of a nanny. Helen had the advantage of family money. She could hire anyone she wanted, but in the end, she remained Alice's primary caregiver. When Alice began the first grade, Helen found herself a bit bored. She wanted to go to work maybe, or go back to school. The one thing she was absolutely sure about was that she didn't want to run a household. She needed something new, something more, so a deal was struck. Helen would find a housekeeper, and Polly would stop murmuring comments about nannies under her breath every time Alice so much as furrowed her brow. Helen's advertisement in the Dysonville Times Classifieds got the attention of Doris Martin, also single mother from town. Helen and Doris were almost immediately as much friends as employer and employee. They found that they thought very much alike about the world. What was wonderful, what was not, and what absolutely had to change. Despite the difference in skin color and background, they found that they had several life experiences in common. Both had gotten involved with the wrong man. Andy was gone, and Samuel Martin, Gordon's father, hadn't seen Doris or Gordon for close to 3 years. Both women were on their own with their children, and Helen and Doris simply liked each other right from the start. For them, the differing colors of their skin mattered not at all. When Doris and Gordon moved into the basement apartment of Helen's rather large house, just a year after Doris started her job, the unlikely friendship between Helen and Polly began to unravel, however imperceptible this was to anyone at the time. Chapter 4. In the summer of 1964, everyone was pushing the boundaries. Some pushed to break them wide open, as others pushed back in a frantic and desperate effort to keep the boundaries secure. The Goldwater-Johnson presidential election was pending, and the good people of Dysonville, Tennessee were working hard to assure the outcome. Dysonville overwhelmingly supported Goldwater. Helen and Doris were simply trying to escape, to give their children a breath of fresh air away from Dysonville's toxic atmosphere. They planned a Florida beach trip for themselves and Alice and Gordon. They weren't trying to push the boundaries, but push them they did. They knew there was some degree of danger in taking this trip together, particularly the drive through Georgia. Doris sat in the back with the children each time they stopped for gas. They had packed enough food to make the trip, and they knew they might need to sleep in the car if they couldn't sneak the sharing of a cottage. But it never occurred to Helen and Doris that their right to share the same ocean would be questioned. In the end, Helen rented a small cottage, somewhat separate from the rest, where all four quietly stayed. On their second morning, as they were swimming, they noticed that they were being beckoned from the beach by 2 police officers. Apparently, there were 2 white families further down the beach, and they had insisted that the officers remove the colorage from the water. The officers looked as if they themselves believed this to be unnecessary, but weren't free to make any other decision. Helen and Doris saw this only as cowardice. They were left with emotions vacillating between sadness and something akin to, but much more than, anger. Alice and Gordon, confused and frightened, retreated to the seclusion of the sand dunes. That August, Alice turned 7 years old. Partly in hopes of blocking the beach trip from all of their minds, Helen threw an elaborate birthday party consisting of a late summer barbecue on her spacious back lawn, complete with a trampoline and the large lily pond full of bright black and orange fish. "I want you to attend this party as my friend." Helen reached for Doris's hand across the kitchen table. "The beach is one thing, but damn it, this is my property, our home. Why can't you be an employee and a friend? I don't understand." "You don't understand because you're kind and loving, and I apologize, but you also don't understand because you're white. If I were white, I would gladly play the role," Helen interrupted her. "You would gladly play the role? Do you mean if you were white, you would come out of the closet as a couple?" Doris smiled. "I don't think the South, Northeast, or West is quite ready for that, but as a black woman, as your black employee, it would just seem odd if I showed up at the party." Helen interrupted her again. "As an equal? Is that what you were going to say? Because you are my equal and my better in so many ways." Helen went around the table and put her arms around Doris's neck. Doris stood and turned around, holding Helen around the waist. "I will go as caretaker for Alice and Gordon. That's it. I will not, under any circumstances, endanger this relationship by throwing it in the face of people who shouldn't care and who won't understand." Doris kissed Helen and smiled. "Well, when you put it that way," Helen replied. The party was a great success and over many years. Indeed, into her adulthood, Alice continued to anticipate the celebrations. Polly loved these events. When, and only when Gordon was occupied elsewhere, she would spend her energy entertaining Alice, who had called her Aunt Polly from the time she began to talk. Lorraine attended these parties for the 4 years she was in town. 4 years in Dysonville had left Lorraine with little more than a sense of boredom. Life with a bar owner, however successful, life in the rural South, however familiar, couldn't entertain Lorraine for long. She was decidedly uncomfortable. She was jumpy. She wasn't sure how much longer she wanted to smile through bridge afternoons or church circle meetings, and she was pregnant. A baby had never been a part of the plan, at least not Lorraine's plan. She had moved herself out of the bedroom she shared with Joe just as soon as she realized. Somehow her response to the news, which could only be called irritation, had pushed to the limit her irritation and disappointment with her life in general. From Joe's perspective, he just wanted her to be as happy and as healthy as possible. He had to admit that the marriage was failing, and he didn't find that particularly irritating or disappointing. Lorraine may have been irritated, bored, and disappointed, but she was not about to leave town, not until the baby was born. She had no intention of being its caregiver, and it was true that Lorraine had found some ways to entertain herself. It was Gordon who told her. "Lorraine," Gordon said suddenly one morning, "can I ask you a question?" Lorraine nodded sleepily. "Why did you marry Joe? I mean Joe, really? The local bar owner doesn't seem quite your style." My style? What style is that?" She rolled over in bed and smiled, her rounded belly holding up the covers. "Maybe you're more my style, dark and dangerous." Gordon loved to believe that Lorraine thought he was dangerous. Lorraine wanted to touch. She wanted to intermingle. She wanted to know what it was like to sleep with a black man, and Gordon Martin was a beautiful black man. None of this really escaped Gordon, but he couldn't help but treasure the fact that she had crawled out of Joe's bed and into his. "Mom is a lesbian, Lorraine. Did you know that?" "Of course you didn't. I've known for a long time." Gordon paused and got out of bed. "A lesbian? Ha! Still sounds strange, even after all these years." Gordon turned suddenly. "You have to keep this to yourself, Lorraine. I should never have opened my mouth." Lorraine was suddenly completely awake. No. "It's okay, Gordon. Wow, how do you know?" "I know because I spent several years living under the same roof with her and my mom." Now Lorraine was not only fully awake, but sitting up and staring hard at Gordon. He thought he saw something different about her eyes. They were absolutely twinkling. "Helen? Your mom and Helen? For years?" Lorraine took a deep breath, suppressed the urge to smile broadly, looked at Gordon with all the sincerity and sensuality she could muster, and said, "So, tell me." Gordon answered all of her questions. Sometime just before Gordon was old enough to fall in love with Alice, he had started to recognize his mother's feelings for Helen. At this point, Helen and Doris had been in love for close to 10 years. Helen knew she had never been so happy. She wanted to tell the world. Doris, the ever-present voice of reason, knew what a mistake that would be. The two remained silent and preserved their respective roles of employer and employee in public, but Doris didn't want to lie to her son. She simply couldn't sneak around him. So when Gordon asked her to confirm what he thought he sensed about the relationship his mom and Helen shared, Doris was honest. Lorraine's mind raced. She could only throw her arms around Gordon. This seemed to him to be somewhat of a non sequitur, but he responded to her as he always did. When Lorraine left Gordon's, she headed straight home. Joe would already be out getting the bar ready for the afternoon rush. She would have her privacy. She needed to think. Helen and Doris, a couple, not only a lesbian couple, but an interracial lesbian couple. She wondered briefly if Polly already knew, then dismissed the idea. Polly would never have tolerated an intimate relationship between Helen and her black maid. Polly, the socialite, the wealthy widow, Helen's jealous and most importantly bigoted friend. Lorraine had everything she needed to do pretty much anything she wanted. She called the following morning. "Hello," Polly answered. "Polly, this is Lorraine Morgan. I need to talk to you." "Really?" Lorraine heard Polly smirk on the other end of the line. "What on earth would you have to say to me that I would care to hear? Unless you're leaving Joe and all the rest of us in peace." "Well, that's kind of what I want to talk to you about." Lorraine knew Polly would never be able to hang up after that. Her curiosity had gotten the better of her reason, and Polly responded, "Come on over, Lorraine. I'm home." Chapter 5. Lorraine arrived late morning. Polly, still not dressed, sat reading the newspaper on her front porch. Without looking up, she said, "Lorraine, so what's the story? How soon are you leaving?" "Well," Lorraine began, "those are two entirely different questions, both with very interesting answers. I'll answer the second question first. I am leaving, and soon, just after you give me the money to do so." Polly raised her eyes. Lorraine smiled, lit a cigarette, and sat down on the wall surrounding the porch. This was Lorraine Morgan, Hamilton Morgan in her element. She knew she had one hell of a hand, and she fully intended to enjoy playing her cards one at a time. "Okay, Lorraine, I'll bite. What money am I giving you?" "Well, Polly, only you will be able to answer that one, but you'll figure out how to get me all the money I ask for." Polly spewed her coffee across the porch, nearly choking on her laughter. "Why on earth would I give you money, Lorraine? In need of some larger clothes you're really getting out there." "I would be a bit nicer if I were you," Lorraine responded. "I'm in a particularly good position to help you, Polly. I can help you with a problem you don't even know you have." "Lorraine, I've lived in Dysonville for 60 years. You've been here for not yet 4. I find it absurd that you think you have information about anything in this town that I don't already know, but hell, it's entertaining. Let's hear it." As Lorraine spoke, so much, too much, began to fall into place for Polly. Doris moving into Helen's house, the beach trip, followed by the sudden decision to throw elaborate parties that had always seemed to Polly to be as much for Helen as for Alice, and the fact that Helen actively avoided ever discussing anything about Doris with her. Polly, you still with us?" Lorraine asked, giving Polly a kick from her seat on the wall. "I said I can help you, remember?" "Help?" Polly shook her head for clarity and tried to focus on Lorraine. "Help me what?" "Help you get rid of Doris, Polly. What else? That is what you want, isn't it?" "Lorraine, you have to leave." Polly stood and started unsteadily for the house. "Leave, really, right now." "Sure, Polly," Lorraine said as she stood to go. "You think about it. You let it all sink in. When you're ready to do something, you let me know, because if you take too long, I may have to expose them." Polly turned, unsteady on her feet. "What? Why would you do that?" "I won't, as long as we can work out an arrangement. Have a nice day, Polly. It is a beautiful day, isn't it?" After throwing up, eating a couple of crackers, and making a good strong martini, Polly began to try to pull together her thoughts. She had to admit that her relationship with Helen had changed the moment Doris came to town, but nothing had alerted her to this. Indeed, the idea would never have even registered on Polly's radar. It was true that since Doris's arrival, Helen had been happier than Polly had ever known her to be, but the idea that Helen's sudden happiness was a mystery to be solved had long ago been abandoned. There was, of course, no question that Lorraine was right. Doris had to go, if only because Polly couldn't abide the thought that she had been the one to bring them together in the first place. Polly poured her second drink and called Lorraine. Just about a month after Lillian was born, Joe found a note left for him on the kitchen table. "Joe, I'm gone. Motherhood was never meant for me. but fatherhood was always meant for you. Don't try to find me, Lorraine. Joe couldn't really imagine any reason he would want to try. Only days later, Helen found a note from Doris, explaining that she loved her and Gordon too much to stay, and she was gone as well. Lorraine's departure and a new baby in the community were both such welcome events that no one really questioned why Lorraine had left. But Doris? That was another matter entirely. Gordon listened in some agony to Helen's ramblings about what might have happened. He just couldn't bring himself to admit that he was responsible. Helen could only imagine that she had done something wrong. She was in bed trying to read when she heard the phone. It was only 8:30. "Hello?" Helen said a bit sleepily. "Helen, it's Doris." "Oh my God," Helen said, up in bed. "Doris, where are you? What on earth? Did I do something? Did you leave me?" "My dear, nothing of the sort. I'll explain everything, but in person. We need to meet. It has to be a complete and total secret. And yes, I realize how ridiculous that sounds. Can you think of a way to get out of town for a bit, for some reason that no one will question?" Of course, Helen answered. "Where are you?" "I'm practically next door, sweetie. I'm at Mom's house in Silver. You know, she left it to me. I just never followed up." "Come as soon as you can, and Helen, I am so sorry." "No, don't be sorry. I knew you wouldn't just leave me. I'll let you know as soon as I can arrange things. I love you, and I'm so glad you called." "Helen, wait. Don't hang up yet. You need to think about something. You're going to have to remember to act like nothing has happened. I know that sounds ridiculous, and I will explain, but in the meantime, as far as you know, your longtime friend and maid just simply left town. Put it on me. I'll be the fall guy. You need to play the role, sweetie." "How am I going to do that? I can't stop smiling," Helen laughed into the phone. "I know," Doris replied. Chapter 6. Polly arrived at Helen's at 9 o'clock sharp the following morning. She needed to see her friend. She wanted to know that all was right again after having had her world turned upside down. She felt justified and satisfied. And was that guilt? No, not guilt. No reason for guilt, she told herself. Doris and Lorraine were gone. She was safe, and she had Helen back all to herself. Helen, are you home? It's Polly. Where are you?" "On the porch, Polly. Come on through." Helen's house stood on a hill, the crest of which formed the base of the front walk. When you came through the front door, you could see the kitchen on the right. Going forward past the kitchen, you entered a large living room. Turn right, and you're in the equally large dining room, which opened, among other directions, onto a long and deep screened porch filled with wicker, comfortable cushioned seats, and oleander plants of all varieties and colors. At the back of the house, the land sloped into a beautiful backyard valley where Helen kept her pond full of large goldfish and beautiful lilies. "Help yourself to coffee in the kitchen," Helen continued, then remembered the muffins left to cool for assisted living. She headed for the kitchen as well. "Polly, leave those muffins. They're too hot to touch." "Okay, Polly, did you hear me?" "I hear you, and I haven't touched your precious cakes, but they look yummy. Are you sure they're too hot?" "Are you going to share with me? I'll bet they'd be great with coffee," Polly exclaimed. "Yes, sure, but not those." Helen turned toward Polly with a smile. "I have a patch for you in the bread box. Help yourself. Grab me one." The two women returned to the porch. Helen had been pruning her beloved plants in the morning sunlight. She cared for them constantly, always in gloves, being careful never to get any of the poisonous sap from the stems on her skin. She had discovered oleander on a trip to Florida many years ago and decided she had to grow them in Tennessee. Her efforts had been very successful. She had a beautiful collection that moved inside or onto the porch as the weather warranted. I'll stop at this point.